Hello? Hello? Okay, okay. Good morning. Good morning, all of you. Thank you. Join to my class. समस्ते आज जाइछ क्लास को. Good morning. सुप्रभात. Okay. आमे वर्तमान लाइव क्लास तीनटा कर सारलेनी. वर्तमान एटा होचे हमर फोर्थ लाइव क्लास. तो जो माने क्लास रे जड़ित होई के अछंती सेमानन को अनुरोध समस्ते पेन आ खाता धरकी बसंतु डायग्राम करंतु आ जहा जहा मो इंपोर्टेंट कथा कहबी ताकू लिखि लिखि जानतु. लास्ट क्लास रे आमे फीमेल रिप्रोडक्टिव सिस्टम रो ओवारी रो स्ट्रक्चर ऊपर पढिले एंड देयर आर द सेवरल इंपोर्टेंट थिंग्स यू हैव टू मन रखियो पड़िबो. जो इंपोर्टेंट जिंस केतडा मो कहया पड़िबो यू हैव टू रिमेंबर ऑल दिस थिंग्स. मुझे तीनटा बिट क्वेश्चन पचारुची लास्ट क्लास रो के कहि परिबो देखिबा. गोटे सब पिला मानकर गोटे बेसी डाउट पिला कहीं बड़ मानकर मध्ये गोटे डाउट अछि. द आउटर मोस्ट लेयर ऑफ ओवारी एक्चुअली ट्यूनिका अल्बुजिनिया ना एपिथेलियल लेयर के कहबो. द आउटर मोस्ट लेयर ऑफ द ओवारी व्हिच इज द एपिथेलियम. एटा समस्तंगर प्राय डाउट. एपिथेलियम परे आसीबो तमर ट्यूनिका अल्बुजिनिया. आउ गुटे मो देखो प्राय तो पिला मन गोटे कंफ्यूजन रहउची. से कंफ्यूजन हला द ओवारी व्हिच प्रेजेंट इनसाइड द पेरिटोनियल कैविटी. पेरिटोनियल कैविटी समस्त भाबुचंती ना ओवारी चारिपटे गोटे कैविटी थिबो ता भितरे हमर ओवारीटा अछि. सेमति नो पेरिटोनियल कैविटी मींस द abdominal cavity which is known as the peritoneal cavity. Okay, so in which form ova actually released from the ovary? In the secondary oocyte. Secondary oocyte form रे ओभा कोन हबो ओवारी रु बाहरी की fallopian tube भितर को जीवो. secondary oocyte very important point. एटा गोटे मन रखियो पड़िबो. The mature follicle of the ovary which is known as the Graafian follicle. ए जिनसटा समस्त जानि थिबे किंतु स्पेलिंग प्राय तो पिला माने बोल करंती GRAAFIAN Graafian follicle. हम पिला माने जानिबा दरकार. Graafian follicle which secrete the hormone which is known as the estrogen. Okay, but the corpus luteum which secrete the hormone is known as the progesterone. से हार्मोन को कहा जाए प्रोजेस्टेरोन. मेनली इंपोर्टेंट बिट क्वेश्चन जोटा प्रोजेस्टेरोन. ओके, ओव्यूलेशन टेकिंग प्लेस 14th डे ऑफ द मेंस्ट्रुअल साइकिल. मेंस्ट्रुअल साइकिल रो मिडिल रे बा 14th डे रे हबो. वो पढेबी तम मान को मेंस्ट्रुअल साइकिल कोन आमे आगरे डिस्कशन करबा. ताले ओवारी रो एतिकी स्ट्रक्चर को आमे भलो भाबरे मन ध्यान रे पाठ पढतिले. ओवारी को होल्ड कर रखिबा पई मिजोवारियम थिला गोटे पट साइड रे. मिजोवारियम सहित ओवारियन लिगामेंट मध्य थाए. ओके, वर्तमान आमी जिबा अदर पार्ट ऑफ द फीमेल रिप्रोडक्टिव सिस्टम. ओवारी, the main role of the ovary which is the production of ova or the egg. That's why the presence of ovary, this is the primary characteristic feature of the female. ovary जा पाखरे अछि से हला फीमेल. वर्तमान ओवारी को छाडी देला परे जहा जा ऑर्गन अछि से ऑर्गन को हमें ना दबा accessory reproductive organ or the secondary reproductive organ because such organ help for the process of reproduction. Okay, so what are the secondary accessory organs of the female reproductive system? Okay, ताहले हमें female reproductive system रो डायग्राम को भलो भाबरे ड्रा करिबा. So the female reproductive system which is comprises of a pair, some of the paired organ and some of the unpaired organs. I have already told that some paired organs and some are unpaired organs are present for the female reproductive system. Okay, ताले paired organ और unpaired organ कोन से ऊपर हमें आज डिस्कशन करिबा. So today our main discussion topic is the rest portion of the female reproductive system other than the ovary. ovary को छाड़ी की आउ कोन कोन सब सिस्टम हम पाखरे अछि ताकू हमें डिस्कशन करिबा सपोज दैट this is the female reproductive system. This is the female reproductive system. Okay, and that is the position of ovary. Agru mu koi deji, this is the position of ovary. Okay, and this is the देखा जाउची. Okay, लास्ट वीडियो रो क्वालिटी टिके हमर खराब आस्तिला, फोकस ठीक रे हेई पारलानी. गोटे स्टूडेंट मत कहला सर स्क्रीन टा को टच कर देले ठीक हबो बोली. मु आज स्क्रीन टा को टच करची, देखा जाओ फोकस कोन होची. So this is the vagina, this is the female reproductive system, and this is the finger like projections around the ovary, and such finger like projection which is known as the fimbriae. So this is the position of the ovary. Suppose that this is the ovary. Okay, so what are the different part of the female reproductive system here? So here this is the fallopian tube which connect to the uterus, and this is the cervix, and this is the vagina. So this is the fallopian tube. This portion is the fallopian tube. This is the fallopian tube. So how many numbers of fallopian tubes are present? So two number of fallopian tubes are present on either side of the uterus. This is the uterus. So on either side of the uterus, that is the two fallopian tube. That's why this is the paired organ. Okay, the uterus, the single uterus present. So this is the unpaired organ. This is the cervix. Vagina, the single vagina present. So this also a unpaired organ. एमानंगु छाड़ी सारला परे we have some of the glands, the accessory gland. जिंदी मेल रे थिला accessory gland कोन कोन seminal vesicle, prostate gland and the Cowper's gland. ता सहित मु आगुटे gland कहितली तममानंगु प्रीवियस रे थाय the glands of Tyson. के मन रखची the glands of Tyson. Okay, so here also different types of glands also present. तापरे जहा जहा अछि मु ता विषय रे कहबी आगुकु. So this is my main topic. First is the fallopian tube. First ame patha padiba fallopian tube. Such fallopian tube which also known as the uterine tube. It also known as uterine tube, because this is the extension of the uterus. Actually, this is the extension of uterus. That's why it is known as the uterine tube. Okay, and such fallopian tube after ovulation of ovum. Suppose that this is the ovum. After ovulation, such egg is carried by the fallopian tube towards the uterus. That's why such fallopian tube also known as the oviduct. This is also known as oviduct. So these are the three different names for the fallopian tube on the basis of the function. On the basis of the function as well as the structure, the fallopian tube, the named as the uterine tube, and the oviduct, it carries the ovum after ovulation. That's why it is known as the oviduct, and it is believed that this is the extension of the uterus. That's why it is known as the uterine tube, and suppose that this is the fallopian tube. Okay, Bhartan fallopian tube bisare ami buji gale. Now go for the structure of the fallopian tube. Mono deki dekho. Now go for the structure of the fallopian tube. Let me erase this portion. Okay, the fallopian tube, if you observe clearly, then you find the fallopian tube which is divisible into three parts. But important thing is which portion is the distal region and which portion is the proximal region. Can you tell me? Suppose that This is the, suppose that this is the hydra and these are the tentacles of the hydra. Can you tell me which portion is the proximal? This portion is proximal region or this portion is proximal region? प्रत्येक अंगर प्रत्येक ऑर्गन रो दीटा रीजन थाए, डिस्टल रीजन आ गोटे थाए प्रोक्सिमल रीजन. बरे पढला बेलकु पढुथबो तो प्रोक्सिमल रीजन, डिस्टल रीजन. बर्तन से विषय में कहूची द fallopian tube, the region or the portion which attached with the uterus, this region is known as the proximal region. This is the proximal region. Okay, and this is the free surface region, and this region is known as the distal portion or the region. Why it is known as distal and it is known as the proximal? Because on the basis of the distance from the axis, suppose that such fallopian tube which attached to this side, suppose that this is the axis and this is the near to the axis, that's why it is known as the proximal region, and this region which is distance from the axis, that's why it is known as the distal region. Okay, axis ro pakhre roile proximal, axis ru durore roile ta na hala distal. ताले fallopian tube ro distal portion hochi eita, proximal portion hochi eita. And can you tell me what is the distal portion of the hydra? The hydra, the mouth of the hydra present in which region? Distal region or the proximal region? Can you tell me? This is the distal region and this is the proximal region. So hydra ro upar portion tala distal region and tala portion ta una dele ame proximal region on the basis of the distance from the axis. Hydra tala ta lagichi substratum re, that's why this is the proximal near to the axis and this is the distance from the axis, that's why which is known as the distal region. Okay, so I mean, this is the fallopian tube which is differentiated into three parts on the basis of the structure or the size. Size को धरिकी तीन भाग कर देले. गोटे बरी आ गोटे part देइची, this portion which is known as the interstitial part. चारि भाग सब बरी चारटा देइनी. Interstitial part चारि भाग देइची, किंतु आमे तीनटा विषय रे मु कहूची जोटा कि generally आमे यूज करछु. So the distal portion which has the funnel shaped structure, and this is known as infundibulum. This is the infundibulum. This portion is the infundibulum, and the narrow portion which connect to the uterus, this portion which is known as the isthmus. Isthmus, ei word ta tame padhithibo, and the solen portion which is known as the ampulla. बर्तमान आमी जानि देले fallopian tube कोन, the tube, this is the one pair present on either side of the uterus and it connect at the supralateral, superior region upore and lateral region. So the two opening of fallopian tube present at the supralateral region. So this is the supralateral region. बुझी पारुछ? Supralateral, superior and the lateral side. So the superior and the lateral side of each supralateral side of uterus receive the connection of fallopian tube. Okay, so this is the fallopian tube and this portion you may say that this is the interstitial portion. एटा को मु छाड़ दोची तीनटा पार्ट कहली, the infundibulum, ampulla and the isthmus. ये तीनटा पार्ट रो गोटे इंपोर्टेंट बिट क्वेश्चन प्रायतः आसे, in which portion actually fertilization taking place. Fertilization means the fusion of ovum and gamete. Ovum और gamete को fuse करे. हमें vagina भीतरे sperm release हला, sperm by the swimming movement it enter into uterus through the cervix, and from uterus it enter into the interstitial fallopian tube and it enter into the ampulla through the isthmus, and the ovum which present here or wait here, and the fusion of ovum and the sperm taking place at the region of ampulla. Actually ampulla re nuho, ampulla and isthmus मझरे हुए. इस्ता ampullary region बोली कहा जाए. आमे plus 2 पाई केबो कहबा जे ampulla भितरे होची. So fertilization taking place inside the ampulla. This is the one bit question. Okay, Another bit question is that the funnel shaped structure, which is known as the infundibulum, the margin of infundibulum, which is provided with finger like structure. This is the finger like structure, and suppose that this is the infundibulum, and these are the funnel shaped structure. This is the infundibulum, and the margin is provided with the finger like projection, which is known as the fimbriae. This is known as the fimbriae. This is known as the fimbriae. Okay, so fimbriae which actually sweeps over the ovary. Ovary upare sabubale emti hotubo. So after ovulation, when the ovum released from ovary, which is trapped by the fimbriae. Fimbriae, because of the movement of the fimbriae which trap the ovum. Otherwise, such ovum will lost inside the peritoneal cavity. Most of the ovulated ovum lost inside the peritoneal cavity. ये जो cavity जो भितरे अछि ovary बा uterus fallopian tube सेटा ला peritoneal cavity. सबु बेले ovum टा जाकी सीधा भितर पसियो बोली किछि गारंटी न. Most of the ovum lost inside the peritoneal cavity. Okay, but because of the movement of fimbriae, the ovum usually enter into fallopian tube. Okay, fallopian tube bhitru gala because of the function of the fimbriae. And the inner lining of fallopian tube. Now come to the inner lining. Eda prayato bahiri nai suni diyo. The inner lining of fallopian tube, which is the which is the columnar shaped epithelial cell. So the inner lining of fallopian tube, which is cuboidal or the columnar shaped cell. Some cells having cilia. Some cells having cilia and some are unciliated cell. The internal lining of fallopian tube, they have two types of cells. Pratham katha la columnar cell thibo, columnar cells, and such columnar cells, some of the columnar cells, they have cilia, and then they are known as the ciliated, and some are the non-ciliated. So the internal lining of the fallopian tube by the ciliated and the non-ciliated columnar cell. So what are the function? Ciliated function tum janithibo, because of the movement of the cilia, which creates the sucking force or the incurrent force. Because of the incurrent force or the sucking force, such ovum, the ovulated ovum, jota ovary bharchi, automatically enter inside the fallopian tube, or which move inside the fallopian tube towards the upper region, ascending region. Okay, ताले जोटा ovulated ovum टा बाहरिला ovary भितरु, से ovum टा आपे आपे भितरु जिवो because of the movement of cilia. Okay, but the non-ciliated columnar cell ro kamo kono? The non-ciliated columnar cell, the free surface which is folding in a finger-like projection and known as the microvilli. They form the microvilli. Eta first year re padhai thibo. Microvilli or villi. Okay. So such non-ciliated columnar shaped cell, they secrete mucus. And what is the role of mucus here? Dekho, gotiye ball bhavo. Ovum, this is the ball. Se bhiturku jauchi. Tolu khasi padibo na nai? Kintu khasiboni because of the secretion of mucus. The non-ciliated columnar cell inside the fallopian tube continuously secrete mucus, and such mucus trap and hold the ovulated ovum. That's why it not drop out. Okay, so this is the whole about of the fallopian tube. Samaste buji parlo? The length of fallopian tube the length of fallopian tube which is 10 cm. The length of fallopian tube which is 10 cm. Bujipalo? This is the fallopian tube, otherwise known as the uterine tube or the oviduct. ଯେତେବେଳେ sterilization କରିବା female ମାନଙ୍କର fallopian tube କୁ କାଟି ଦିଆଯାଏ and which is known as the which is known as okay ଭାବ this is the fallopian tube. ବର୍ତ୍ତମାନ ଯିବା come to the uterus. Uterus, this is the most muscular structure of the female reproductive system. This is the uterus. This is the most muscular sac-like pear-shaped structure. This is the sac-like and the pear-shaped structure. This is the uterus. Okay, and this uterus you can divide three parts. The upper region. देखो uterus को हम तीन भाग में विभक्त करिबा. So what is uterus? The uterus which present in between urinary bladder, in front that is the urinary bladder, and the posterior region that is the rectum. So the uterus which present in between urinary bladder and the rectum. पछपटे digestive system रो rectum अछि, आगपटे urinary bladder अछि, मझरे रहइबो uterus. Uterus को हमें काटी देइछन्ती. This is the cut open structure, that's why it's seen like this. So I mean देखा जाउछ हमकु. Okay, so this is the structure of the uterus. So this is the inverted pear shaped structure. गोटे pear नाशपाती voltage रे जिम देखा जिवो. This is the inverted pear shaped structure, and the muscular wall is more muscular sac like structure, and it is divided into three parts. The upper region which receive the opening of fallopian tube, this region is known as the fundus. This region is known as fundus. This region is the fundus. And the middle portion, this portion which is known as the body. And this is the neck portion, and this is the neck of the uterus. This is the neck. So you can divide the uterus three parts: fundus, body, and the neck region. This is the neck portion, or you can say this is the cervix. This is the cervix. So the fundus region, this is the upper side of the uterus which receive the on either side of the lateral side of the uterus, on either side of the fundus which receive the opening of the fallopian tube, and this is the body portion, this is the middle portion, and which is the triangular in shape, which is known as the body. This is known as the body. And the last portion which is known as the neck, or this is the cervix region. Cervix. Okay, ବର୍ତ୍ତମାନ ଆର wall ପାଖକୁ ଯିବା. This is the actually the wall of uterus. It has three layers. But important ଜିନିଷ କହିବି ଏଠି, the wall of uterus, it has three layers. The outermost layer of uterus which is known as the perimetrium. Can you tell me what actually perimetrium is? Perimetrium actually kono ki koibo? What actually perimetrium is? Samaste bhabutho perimetrium which is made up of fibrous connective tissue bhol. Perimetrium which is made up of single squamous epithelial layer. So the outer is the single squamous epithelial layer. Single squamous epithelial layer. This is the perimetrium. Okay, the outermost layer, which is known as the perimetrium. So this is the perimetrium. Okay, and the middle portion, the middle region, the middle portion which is made up of the middle layer of the uterus, which is made up of thick, smooth thick smooth muscle retiari, the middle region, and the thick band of muscles present here, and which is known as the myometrium. Myo means muscles, metrium, myometrium. And the inner layers, this is the inner layer, and the inner layer which is known as endometrium. Endometrium. कौन कौन कहली यूटेरस रो वॉल रे तीनटा लेयर अछि द आउटर व्हिच इज नोन एज द पेरीमेट्रियम एटा कोन पे इंपोर्टेंट कोन पे ना समस्त भाबुथिबे समस्तंग भलिया गोटे कैप्सूल थिबो ऊपर ना कैप्सूल नो दिस इज नॉन भास्कुलर ओके स्लाइटली भास्कुलर नॉन भास्कुलर बट इट इज मेड अप ऑफ सिंगल लेयर ऑफ स्क्वामस एपिथेलियम ओके दिस इज द पेरीमेट्रियम आ कथा सल्ला वर्तमान जीवा मायोमेट्रियम the smooth band of thick muscle present and which form the myometrium, which aid the contraction, the vigorous contraction of the uterus. जेतेबेले uterus टा contraction करे का द्वारा करिवो because of the contraction of the myometrial layer. Okay, and the inner layer which is known as the endometrium. The inner layer which is known as endometrium. Here, the inner layer which is made up of columnar shaped epithelial cell. Columnar shaped epithelial cell. Suppose that this is the columnar shaped epithelial cells. Suppose that these are the columnar shaped epithelial. All the columnar shaped epithelial cells descends into the lamina propria. ये जो कॉलमनार शेप्ड सेल देखुचो ता तळे रहिछि बेसमेंट मेम्ब्रेन तार ऊपर सरफेस को पाइ जा लामिना प्रोपिया ता भितर को पसि जाइथिबो एंड व्हिच फॉर्म्स डिफरेंट ग्लैंड्स यूटराइन ग्लैंड्स ओके वर्तमान एंडोमेट्रियम कोन द इनर लेयर व्हिच इज नोन एज द एंडोमेट्रियम ओके the inner surface of the endometrium which is made up of columnar shaped cell okay such columnar shaped cell descend into the lamina propria of basement membrane and which forms different glands suppose that these are the uterine glands okay एतिकी पर्यंत आमे बुझी गले ए पाखरे गुड इंपोर्टेंट जिंस अछि the endometrium wall or the endometrial wall which again divided into two parts. The upper region, this is the upper, this is upper, the upper region which is known as the stratum functionalis, and the inner which is known as this is the inner suppose that this is known as the stratum basalis or basalis. The endometrium layer which is divided into two parts, the upper portion which is known as the stratum functionalis and the lower layer which is known as the stratum basalis. बुझी पारछो पिला माने देखो एटा प्राय बहिरे नथिबो the endometrial wall किंतु CHSE पाई इंपोर्टेंट ब्यूरो बहिरे हमर अछि the endometrial wall which is divided into two parts, the outer stratum functionalis, the inner stratum basalis. Okay, so at the time of menstrual cycle only the superficial stratum functionalis will erodate will cast off, will wash out only the stratum functionalis. जो ऊपर layer टा रहिला stratum functionalis, at the time of menstrual flow, this layer will degrade and wash out, and the dermis comes outside through the vaginal canal. बुझी पारलो जेतोल menstrual cycle हबो such stratum functionalis wash out हेजिवो, destroy हेजिवो, पदा को पळे आसीबो. But the stratum basalis remain as such. The stratum basalis which remain as such and which secrete and which regenerate the superficial layer, the stratum functionalis. Okay, so this is the stratum basalis which regenerate the stratum functionalis or the superficial layer of the endometrium after the menstrual flow. Okay, so this is the whole about of the uterus. Okay, बर्तमान यूटेरस रो आउ टिके जिंस अछि. The uterus ये पाखरे करिबा एवड देखा जिवनी बुझी पालो पिला माने. The uterus wall is made up of 3 layers. The outer perimetrium, middle is the myometrium, inner is the endometrium. Endometrium again it has the 2 layer. The outer is the stratum functionalis. Outer means inside the lumen, and the base of the stratum functionalis, this is the stratum basilaris. Okay, the stratum functionalis, this layer which wash out at the time of menstrual flow. After menstrual flow, the stratum basalis which regenerate the stratum functionalis. Okay, वर्तमान ए जगह आ गोटे जिंस देखैबी. Okay, okay, it such ए पाखरे करबा. Such uterus, suppose that this is the 2 layers of the uterus. The outer, which is the stratum basalis, and the inner, which is the stratum functionalis. पूरा डॉक्यूमेंट ना देले endometrium. This is the endometrium or the endometrial layer. The such wall of uterus, it get the supply of blood from the uterine blood vessel or uterine artery. Suppose that this is the uterine artery. This is the uterine artery. Such uterine artery which forms branches, and such branch is known as the acute artery. So this is known as the acute artery. Okay, कौन कहली? The wall of uterus which receive the blood from the uterine artery, and such uterine artery which divide and form the acute artery. Such acute artery moves circumferentially. Suppose that this is the round shaped structure देखिवा, ताले round है कि ये supply है थी. This is which supply blood circumferentially. Okay, then acute artery which divide, such acute artery which divide into radial artery. Suppose that this is the radial artery. Okay, या तुम्हारे बही नहीं radial artery. So this is known as the radial artery. This is the radial artery. And such radial artery which forms branches, the short branch or the straight branch, and the long branch or the spiral branch. Long and spiral branch. बुझी पालो? So the uterine artery which form the acute artery. The acute artery again which divide and form the radial artery, and the radial artery which forms the two branches. One is the spiral artery. This is the spiral artery, and another is the basal or the straight artery. This is the basal artery. This is the basal artery. It is known as basal because it supplies the blood to the stratum basalis. Stratum basalis. Okay. And the spiral artery which supply the blood to the stratum functionalis. Okay, stratum functionalis. The stratum basalis, sorry, basal artery, which also known as basal artery or the straight artery. This is also known as straight artery. Tamo boide straight artery lekha heichi. This is also known as the straight artery. Eta mon rakhibo pila mane. Eta onyo boide nai. Uterine artery which forms the acute artery. Such acute artery which moves circumferentially throughout the uterus, and such acute artery which divide and which forms the branches known as the radial artery. These are the radial artery, and such radial artery again form the two branch. One is the basal artery which is short and supply the blood to the basal layer or the stratum basalis of the endometrium, and another is the long spiral artery which is known as the spiral artery, and which supply the blood to the stratum functionalis of the endometrium. Eta kain koili? Because such spiral artery which is more sensitive to the level of concentration of progesterone and estrogen hormone inside the blood of female. Female ro blood re progesterone or estrogen ro level ku dhariki, this is the more sensitive. Jadi, so such spiral artery, it wash out or it destroyed at the time of menstrual flow. Again, it regenerate because of the influence of the estrogen and progesterone. Estrogen or progesterone hormone द्वारा इस spiral artery रो सबो बेले कौन होतुबो? एटा destruction होतुबो, then again regeneration होतुबो. Okay, so then we can say that such a spiral artery which is more sensitive to the level of the concentration of progesterone and estrogen in the female. Okay, so this is the whole about of the structure of the uterus. So uterus, this is the fundus, this is the body, and this is the cervix. This portion is known as the cervix. Our size or length is so what is the actual length? The actual length of the uterus, which is 7.5 cm, and the width which is 5 cm, and the thickness about 2.5 cm. Okay, now come to the cervix. What is the cervix? देखो cervix ऊपर समस्त को प्राय डाउट रहबो तमे डायग्राम को रफली कले हबनी जूलॉजी में पाठ पढ़िया पे हले डायग्राम को मन दाउ पड़िबो हमें हाई स्कूल भलिया डायग्राम कले हबनी रफली एटा साइंटिफिकली डायग्राम हवा दरकार एग्जैक्ट पोजीशन रे एग्जैक्ट जिंस को लेवल करियो पड़िबो तो सब डायग्राम को इंपोर्टेंस दियो पिला माने डायग्राम को इंपोर्टेंस दो नांती तो देखो cervix रीजन रे किछि गोटे चेंज आसीबो. ओके, now come to the lower neck portion which is known as the cervix. So this is the, suppose that the neck portion of uterus, lower neck portion of the uterus which communicate with, or lower angle of the uterus which communicate with the cervix. This is the cervix. Okay, such cervix, there is the two opening, and this is the canal, and such canal, this canal is known as the cervical canal. This canal is known as, bhalo bhaବରେ dekho, this canal dekhi parcho, this canal is known as cervical canal. Okay, so this is cervix, but this is cervical canal. Okay, such cervical canal, there is the two opening. Suppose that this is the internal opening which communicate with the body of uterus to inner side and outer side to the cervical canal, and this opening is known as the internal orifice. This is known as the internal orifice. Board diagram करके labeling कले हबो internal orifice. This is the internal orifice, or also known as the internal os. Internal os. Okay, and there is the another opening which communicate internally to the cervical canal and outer to the cervix, which is known as the external orifice. Pura labeling kore, this is external orifice or external os. बुझी पारलो, cervix रो ऊपर cervical canal हुए, एड़ा मन रखिबो, and cervical canal, it has two opening. Inside, this is the internal orifice. It is not important. CHSE important no. And the outer side, this is the external orifice, and this is the cervix region. Okay, and this region also important. This region, at the time of pregnancy, the junction, the opening of cervix to the vagina. Suppose that this is the vagina. This is the vaginal canal. Okay, so vagina which communicate inside to the cervix, and cervix which communicate to outside through the vagina, and there is the junction, and such junction which is sealed temporarily at the time of pregnancy. Okay, and which is known as the mucus plug. Mucus plug, which is known as the mucus plug. Pregnancy samayore such opening which is sealed by the mucus, and that's why it is known as the mucus plug. Okay, so this is whole about of the structure of the uterus. Now come to the copulatory organ of the female reproductive system, that is the vagina. ले कौन कौन तमु कहली वर्तमान पर्यंत फास्ट पढ़ेली the fallopian tube which is paired, then the uterus, then the cervix, then the vagina. So now come to the structure of vagina. So vagina, this is the canal. This is the canal, and which communicate to outside through the opening, and this opening is known as the vaginal opening. This is known as the vaginal orifice or the vaginal opening. Ame vulva पढ़ला को आ विषय देखिबा. But the length of vagina, which is about 7 to 10 cm, the length of vagina which is about 7 to 10 cm. Okay, and there is no gland. The wall is elastic. There is no gland inside the wall of the vagina. मन रखिबो, vagina रो wall रे कोनसी प्रकार gland नहीं. Okay, but the wall of vagina which contains one bacteria, lactobacillus acidophilus, गोटे bacteria vaginal wall रे थाए, lactobacillus acidophilus, which secrete the acid, lactic acid, and which keep the pH about 3.5 to 4.5, which provide the vagina from the bacterial infection. Okay, vaginal wall ta सब बेले भितरे कौन थाए, acidic थाए. कौन पाई? Because of the secretion of lactic acid from the lactobacillus acidophilus, गोटे bacteria थाए, and which secrete the acid and keep the pH about 3.5 to 4.9. कहीं ना ये जो secretion of acid टा bacterial infection हबनी, it protect the vagina from the bacterial infection. Okay, वर्तमान जवा the external genital organ which is known as the vulva. पिला माने बुझी पड़चो, सुनचो मन देकी ना पहले सब क्लास छाड़ी की सुनचो. ओके बर्तमान मन देखि देख बहुत गुडी जिंस कहली भाजिना रो इंपोर्टेंट जिंस हला गुटे कोन लेंथ इज नॉट इंपोर्टेंट भाजिना रो इंपोर्टेंट जिंस होची द वॉल इज इलास्टिक एंड व्हिच इज नोन एज द copulatory organ because it received the penis at the time of copulation. That's why the vagina is known as the copulatory organ. And the wall is elastic. That's why it can accumulate any type of penis at the time of copulation, and through which the young baby gives to birth or comes out. The young baby comes out through this canal. That's why the vagina also known as birth canal, not cervix. केते पिला पचारा जीवो birth canal कोटा से cervix कहबे cervix नुआ the vagina this is known as the birth canal which is also known as the copulatory organ and it receives the penis at the time of copulation. Okay, so this is the whole about of the structure of the female reproductive system. Now देखो गोटे पिला माने गोटे भलो मन देखि देखो मत की कहि परिबो what is the difference between mucus and mucus? Can you tell me what is the difference between mucus and mucus? Mucus means this is the noun, this is the secretion of the cell, this is the noun word, and the mucus this is the adjective word, the mucous membrane, this is the adjective, this is the adjective word. Okay, mucus means noun, mucus means adjective word. Okay, this is the fundamental basic thing you have to know, you must have to know. Okay, so now come to the external genitalia of female. The external genitalia of female which is known as vulva. V-U-L-V-A, vulva. The external genitalia of female which is known as the vulva. So this is the external genitalia of the female. Diagram करो, diagram न कले किछि बुझि परिबोनी. External genitalia of the female, there are the several parts. I am going through one by one. Okay, suppose that this is the external genitalia of the female. The first thing is that there is the elevated, the pad-like elevated structure which is known as the mons pubis. The pad-like elevated structure which is known as mons pubis. Mons pubis. Externally it is clearly visible. This is known as the mons pubis. After puberty, the outer surface of mons pubis, which is filled with or provided with pubic hairs. Okay, so this is the triangular pad-like elevated structure made up of adipose tissue. This is known as the mons pubis. Okay, and from the upper side of the mons pubis, the flap-like structure, or the lip-like structure, the muscular lip-like structure, which extends from downward. So from mons pubis, the flap-like structure which extends downward, and such flap-like structure or the muscular structure which is known as the labia majora. So this is known as the labia majora. This is known as labia majora. From the mons pubis, to downwards, the flip-like structure which extends and which is known as the labia majora. This is the muscular lip, the outermost region which is rough and provided with hair. After puberty or at the time of puberty, this outer region which is provided with hair, and such hair persists throughout life. Okay, such hair persists throughout life. Okay, this is the labia majora. So inner to labia majora, there is the thin flap-like structure present. The thin flap-like structure present, muscular structure present, muscular lip-like structure present, which is known as the labia minora. If you hold the labia minora and slightly push outward, then the structure look like this. This is the labia. This is the labia minora. Okay, so this is the labia minora. This is the labia minora. Okay, such labia, it not connected, fused to each other at the lower region, but at the upper region, both are fused to each other. Both are fused to each other, and which forms a slight elevated structure. A slight elevated structure which is known as clitoris. Which is known as the clitoris. Okay, the upper region which is joined to each other and which form the small finger-like structure which is known as the clitoris. Okay, so this is the clitoris. This clitoris which is more sensitive to touch and which help for the sexual erosion. And this is the homologous of the human penis. This is the homologous part of the human penis, or the penis of man. It is just small letter actually. And such clitoris which is protected by the mons pubis. It is protected by the mons pubis. It is protected by the mons pubis. And such region is known as the prepuce or glans. Glans or prepuce. Labia minora. So inner to the labia majora, there is the labia minora. So both the surface, inner and outer surface of the labia minora, which is provided with mucous layer, which keeps slimy or the slippery. So this is the labia minora. So labia majora, also known as greater lip. This is also known as greater lip, and the labia minora, which also known as the greater minor lip, okay, or the lesser lip. This is also known as lesser lip, the greater lip and the lesser lip. So the space which is enclosed by the labia minora, which is known as vestibule. It is important. The space which is enclosed by the labia minora, which is known as vestibule. So this is known as vestibule. The space is known as vestibule. This is known as the vestibule. And the vestibule which contains the opening of different glands and the opening of urethra and the opening of vagina. So at the middle, that is the opening of, vagina. This is the vaginal orifice. So at the middle, that is the opening of vagina. This is the opening of vagina. Okay. And in front of vaginal opening, there is the opening of urethra. This is the opening of ureter through which urine pass outside. This is the opening of This is the opening of urethra through which urine pass to outside. Okay. So the urethral opening which present in between clitoris and the opening of vagina, and posterior to the vagina, that is the opening of, this is the anus. So this is the reproductive system which present in between rectum, opening of anus, and this is the urinary bladder, opening of urethra. Okay, and this is the opening of the vagina. In case of virgin, the opening of vagina, which is slightly or the partially covered by ligamentous structure, and which is known as hymen. The opening of, in case of virgin, the opening of vagina which is partially closed by hymen. Such hymen, it tends to bleed. So physical exercise or the cycling, swimming, or the lifting of high weight, which tends to rupture the hymen. Physical କାର୍ଯ୍ୟକଳାପ ଦ୍ୱାରା hymen rupture ହବାର ବେଶୀ chance ଅଛି ବା rupture ହେଇଯାଏ. But such hymen it totally disappear after the first delivery. ଛୁଆ ଜନ୍ମ ହେଲା ପରେ hymen ଆଦୌ ରହିବ ନାହିଁ. Okay, so the hymen completely disappear after the delivery. Okay, so this is the hymen, this is the opening of vagina, and these are the different parts. So the clitoris, mons pubis, labia majora, labia minora, so all these vestibule, all these things which is known as the vulva. This is known as the external genital organs of a female. ବୁଝିପାରିଲ ପିଲାମାନେ? आर बिट क्वेश्चन को देखिबा. ओके, बिट क्वेश्चन कोडी कोडी अछि देखो मन देकी. The clitoris, which is homologous to human penis. Okay, this is one bit question. The labia majora, it is homologous. The labia majora, which is homologous to the human male scrotum. Male scrotum sahita labia majora, this is the homologous. This is important bit question. Okay, and hymen also important. Okay, so now come to the glands. A diagram thau ame gland over discussion kariba. Okay, so in case of female, some of the glands are present, or some of the glands those are involved for the process of reproduction. कौन glands अछि देखिबा female रे. सुनछ समस्ते कौन ग्लैंड अछि कि कहि परिबो फीमेल रे? फीमेल accessory or female glands. Important gland समस्त जानछो, you all are the mammals. So mammary gland, this is the first gland, the mammary gland, and the vestibular gland. Very important. मन देखि देखो vestibular gland. So female मान को पाखरे जितकी gland ले तो दिभाग कर देले. So in case of female, there are the two types of gland, or we classified the two types of gland on the basis of the position. One is the mammary gland, another is the vestibular gland. The vestibule indicates that this region which is known as the vestibule. So the gland which are open inside the vestibule, these are known as the vestibular gland. So around the urethra, so this is the urethral opening. Okay. So around the urethra, there is the opening of smaller gland, very small, numerous openings are there, or numerous openings of glands are there. Chot opening thibo around the opening of urethra, and such gland is known as the para-urethral gland. This is known as the para-urethral gland. Okay, around the opening of urethra, there is the numerous opening of the gland which is known as the para-urethra. Para means side, urethra, para-urethral gland. Okay, And on either side of the opening of vagina, on either side of the opening of vagina, there is the opening of two glands. That is the opening of two glands. Suppose that these are the two glands, and this is the duct which open into the vagina, and such gland is known as Bartholin gland. This is known as the Bartholin gland. Okay, so this is one pair, Bartholin gland, which is one pair. So another is the Bartholin gland. Bartholin gland. Mandiki dekho, the female ray, we have two types of gland. One is the mammary gland, another is the vestibular gland. The vestibular gland which present inside the vestibule, the very small numerous opening of gland present around the opening of the urethra, which is known as the para-urethral gland. Labeling karibi, these are the para-urethral gland. Para-urethral gland. This is known as the para-urethral gland around the opening of urethra. Such para-urethral gland, this is the homologous to the male prostate gland. Important. It is homologous to the male prostate gland. Homologous to the male prostate gland. Which gland? Para-urethral gland of female, which is homologous to the male prostate gland. Okay. And the Bartholin gland. This Bartholin gland, which is also homologous to the male Cowper's gland or the bulbourethral gland. Cowper's gland. It is homologous to the Cowper's gland. Kintu higher class re ame dekhiba Cowper's gland, it is not homologous, it is analogous gland. Kintu CHSE ba +2 level re ame pila manku pahe dochu, this is the homologous gland. Okay, tale kon important bit question baharla dekhilo. The clitoris, this is the homologous to the penis of the male. The para-urethral gland, this is homologous to the prostate gland of the male. Labia majora, this is homologous to the male scrotum. The Bartholin gland, which is the homologous or analogous, parika jaha kale bi kote kotha habo, homologous to the Cowper's gland. So these are the very important things. So etik jinso bujile. So what is the function? The function of Bartholin gland. The function of Bartholin gland, which secrete viscous alkaline fluid at the time of intercourse, and which facilitate the process of intercourse at the time of copulation. Okay, so it lubricate the wall of vagina for the process of intercourse or the copulation. Okay, so this is the Bartholin gland. And the para-urethral gland, which present around the opening of urethra, actually the function prayato bahari deini, but actually such a gland which secrete antibacterial factor, and which protect the opening of urethra from bacterial infection. जो यूरिन इन्फेक्शन होची ताकू न करेवा पाई कोन करा जाईची ना यूरेथ्रा रो चारिपटे पारायूरेथ्रल ग्लैंड रो ओपनिंग अछि. सो पारायूरेथ्रल ग्लैंड which secrete the antibacterial factor and which prevent the bacterial infection from the opening of urethra. Okay, so these are the different glands. Such paraurethral gland, which is known as the lesser vestibular gland. This is known as also known as paraurethral gland, also known as our size बहुत छोटा but numerous. That's why it is known as the lesser vestibular gland. Okay, and such lesser vestibular gland or the paraurethral gland, also known as glands of Skinny. It also known as glands of SKENE. The glands of Skinny. So the paraurethral gland or the lesser vestibular gland, also known as glands of Skinny. Okay, and the Bartholin gland, if it is lesser, then Bartholin gland, the size is larger, but the number is 2, but the size is larger, and which is known as the greater vestibular gland. This is known as the greater vestibular. This is known as the greater vestibular glands. Okay, so this is the female gland, and we have another gland. This is the mammary gland. बर्तमान mammary gland पढ़िबा बुझी पाउछ समस्ते. ओके, देखि पाउछि mammary gland पढ़िबा. mammary gland केतरा इंपोर्टेंट बिट क्वेश्चन अछि मु कहयो पड़िबो, तो हमें mammary gland को वर्तमान दिबा. सो एडा बुझी पालो ठीक रे कंप्लीट हे गेला समस्तंगर किछि डाउट नाही. ओके, वर्तमान दिबा द mammary gland. This is the important gland because it secretes the milk secreting gland. And this is the modification of which gland? Can you tell me? The mammary gland, this is the modification of which gland? The mammary gland, it is the modification of which gland? Can you tell me? The mammary gland, this is the modification of which gland? The mammary gland, this is the modification of sweat gland. This is the modification of sweat gland. And such gland which develops on the thorax, on the pectoral muscle, on the pectoral muscles at the time of puberty. Okay, and it has the protuberance. Such protuberance is known as the nipple. This is known as nipple. This is the pectoral muscle. Suppose that this is the pectoral muscles. The one pair of bulging mammary gland develop on the pectoral muscles at the time of puberty or after puberty. But the true functional mammary gland develops at the time of pregnancy. Okay, this is the pectoral muscle. This is the pectoral muscle, and such gland also known as the breast, which is also known as the breast. The nipple, this is the protuberance, and which is surrounded by the pigmented area, and such pigmented area which is known as areola, Okay, each breast or mammary gland, which is composed of 15 to 20 number of lobes, and each lobe contains number of lobules. Each lobe contains number of lobules, and each lobule contains milk secreting alveolus or alveoli or alveoli or the follicle. Okay, suppose that this is the one duct, and this duct is divided into 2 or 3 ducts and entering into the lobules of the gland. Each gland or each lobule, that is the bunch of grapes-like structure, and which secrete the milk, and such bunch of grape-like structure which is known as the milk secreting follicle. So this is known as the milk secreting follicle or the alveoli. So this is the milk secreting follicle. This is the milk secreting follicle, which present or which looks like a bunch of grapes. Okay, and such milk secreting follicles which drain the milk to the duct, and by the conversion of all duct from the lobes which form the single duct. So one lobe which contains single duct This is known as the lactiferous duct. This is known as lactiferous, or you can say this is the lactiferous follicle. Okay, same. Lactiferous means milk secreting, lactiferous duct. So such lactiferous duct which run towards the nipple and below the areola, which forms the swollen structure which is known as the ampulla. This is the ampulla, and from ampulla such duct which forms a narrow tubes and open to outside on the surface of the nipple. Okay, so the nipple which contains how many number of opening? About 15 to 20 number, because single lobe which contains, or from single lobe one lactiferous duct comes out. Okay, and each lobe they are separated from each other by the presence of fibrous connective tissue. So the breast, which is divided into number of lobes about 15 to 20, and in between lobes the presence of fibrous connective tissue, and they form the septum. Okay, this is the fibrous connective tissue. This is the fibrous connective tissue. So likewise, number of septum present and the fibrous connective tissues present, and here also there is the mass of fatty tissue or the fat containing tissue present. This is the adipose tissue. So this is the adipose tissue. The fat containing tissue is present, which is known as the adipose tissue. This is the adipose tissue. So the size of the breast, which depends on the presence of amount of adipose tissue. If the adipose tissue is more than the size of the mammary gland, it may be larger. Okay, so this is the adipose tissue. The functional lactiferous follicle developed at the time of pregnancy. Okay, so the milk formation and the development of breast, there are several enzymes are involved. The development of breast is taking place by the influence of two female hormone, estrogen and the progesterone. So because of the estrogen hormone and the progesterone hormone, the development of breast taking place. Okay, and the formation of milk taking place because of the one hormone which is known as the prolactin. The prolactin, it secretes from the anterior pituitary gland. Prolactin, which helps for the synthesis or the secretion of the milk inside the mammary gland. And another hormone which is the oxytocin. The oxytocin hormone, which is secreted from the posterior pituitary gland, and such oxytocin hormone which help for the ejection of milk. What is the meaning of ejection? Secretion means synthesis. Okay, ejection means the milk which temporarily secreted and deposited at the ampullary region at the time of contraction of the smooth muscles, automatically the milk is ejected out. So such process taking place by the action of oxytocin. So the releasing of milk taking place by the action of oxytocin. Okay, so this is the function of the mammary. Okay, काकु बुझिलानी किए कहबो समस्त बुझी पारलो. So mammary gland, this is the modification of the sweat gland. So another tuber-like structure present, which is known as the Montgomery tubercles or the gland. Montgomery tubercles. Montgomery tubercles. So the Montgomery tubercles which present at the margin of the pigmented area of nipple, which is painless bombs or the tubercles like structure. Actually, this is the sebaceous gland. This is the sebaceous or the oil gland, which secrete the oil and keep the surface of nipple and keep the surface of areola slippery. Okay, so this is the whole about of the mammary gland. The first milk of mother, which is known as colostrum, colostrum. Okay, very important big question. And the milk of human, which contains immunoglobulin A, alpha immunoglobulin. This is the secretory immunoglobulin, and such immunoglobulin also present in our tears, in our saliva, in our the secretion of sweat. That's why the immunoglobulin A, which is known as the secretory immunoglobulin. Okay. Montgomery गोटे नुआ जिनस कहली एटा पाए तुम पाइबनी and colostrum, this is the first milk of the mother which contains the immunoglobulin A very much amount सब बेले थिबो immunoglobulin A, but the colostrum which contains much protein and the immunoglobulin A. Okay, and what is the composition of human milk? एटा तमे माने निजे सर्च करो पढ़ो आमे नेक्स्ट क्लास रे ऊपर डिस्कशन करिबा. समस्ते बुझी पारलो कोन डाउट रहला? समस्ते बुझी पारलो ठीक रे? आज साउंड क्वालिटी वीडियो क्वालिटी ठीक अछि? समस्ते घरे पढ़िबो समस्ते डायग्राम करिवो. डायग्राम हला इंपोर्टेंट. डायग्राम करो, नोट लिखिबा को चेष्टा करो, बही पढ़ो. तापरे मु तमानू सब सेंड कर देबी, नोट सेंड करबी, बिट क्वेश्चन सेंड करबी. ओके, नो डाउट. ओके, सो आमे आज रो क्लास रे बहुत बड़ी बिट क्वेश्चन डिस्कशन कले, तापरे टिके फोकस करिवो समस्ते. ओके, ओके, थैंक यू. Okay, thank you. Join with us. Okay, thank you.